In the peaceful small town of Willowbrook, life moved slowly and quietly. The residents had always felt a sense of comfort that came from years of living side by side with familiar faces. Children played in front yards until the sun went down, and people rarely locked their front doors. It was the kind of place where everyone believed they knew their neighbors well and trusted that nothing truly terrible could ever happen. That belief began to crumble on a late spring afternoon when a young woman named Amelia Park did not return home from work. She worked at a local bookstore located only a short walk from her house. Her daily routine was simple and familiar to everyone. Close the shop at 5, walk through Maple Park, and arrive home before sunset. On that particular day, however, Amelia never made it back. At first, her family believed she had stayed late to help with inventory, but when the phone rang endlessly at the bookstore and no one answered, concern turned into fear. The search began as soon as her family contacted the police. Volunteers and officers retraced her usual path through Maple Park. The ground was checked carefully, bushes were pushed aside, and flashlights swept the area as night approached. It didn't take long before one officer found Amelia's phone lying in a patch of grass just off the path. The screen was shattered, as if it had been dropped with force or stepped on. The battery was dead, leaving investigators unable to trace the last calls or messages. The town was shaken by the news, and search parties continued long into the night. They found no more clues, but many claimed they heard something unusual earlier that day. Some said a loud engine, others claimed to have seen an unfamiliar vehicle near the edge of town. The next morning, investigators examined the park again in daylight. Near the phone, they identified unusual tire tracks leading away from the main walking trail. The tracks appeared fresh and out of place, because no construction vehicles were allowed in the park. They were deep enough to show that the vehicle left quickly, almost in a rush. Police photographed every inch and took measurements, but their search through local vehicle records came up empty. No one in town owned a car that matched the track pattern. Fear spread rapidly as residents realized that someone from outside their community might have been secretly watching. It became clear that Amelia's disappearance was not accidental. People began locking their doors and bringing their children inside before dark. The once lively park became empty and silent. Businesses stayed open fewer hours, and neighbors who used to chat casually now watched the street with suspicion. Every unfamiliar sound was met with worry, and every unknown car in the area caused someone to call the police. What once felt like the safest town was slowly turning into a place filled with doubt and anxiety. As days passed with no new information, the community struggled to accept the possibility that Amelia might never return. The quiet streets felt heavier than ever, and the hope of finding her alive slowly started to fade. 3 weeks after Amelia's disappearance, the peaceful facade of Willowbrook finally shattered when a construction crew on the outskirts of town made a horrifying discovery. While preparing to clear a long-abandoned development site, one of the workers noticed a section of freshly disturbed soil. Curious and cautious, the group began to dig, expecting to uncover old debris or forgotten building material. Instead, they uncovered the remains of Amelia Park, carefully wrapped in a faded blanket and buried beneath layers of dirt and gravel. The scene was immediately sealed off, and forensic teams rushed to the area to collect any possible evidence. Word of the discovery spread rapidly through town, sending residents into a state of collective grief and disbelief. Any lingering hope that Amelia might have been alive was now gone, replaced by a sense of devastating loss. The investigation that followed revealed that the way Amelia had been buried was disturbingly meticulous. There were no fingerprints, no signs of personal belongings, and no traces that could link the crime directly to any known suspects. Even the blanket she was wrapped in had no identifying characteristics. Everything about the scene made it clear that the killer had deliberately planned the murder and carefully tried to cover their tracks. Police officers combed through Amelia's life, hoping to find a motive or an unresolved conflict that could lead to a suspect. But Amelia had no known enemies. She was well liked by co-workers, neighbors, and friends. Her life appeared so ordinary and quiet that investigators struggled to understand why someone would target her. A new wave of fear swept through the town when surveillance footage was retrieved from a street near Maple Park. The footage captured a dark van driving past the park minutes before Amelia vanished. The image quality was poor, and the license plate was impossible to read. Making matters worse, no one in Willowbrook owned a van matching the general description, and no one recognized it as belonging to any visitor. Investigators reviewed several weeks of footage, hoping to spot the vehicle again, but it never reappeared. Rumors began circulating among residents, and suspicion fell on anyone unfamiliar. Neighbors kept a close eye on unfamiliar faces, and tension grew with each passing day. Community meetings were held to address the rising anxiety, and officers urged residents to remain calm and report anything unusual. Despite these efforts, the atmosphere around town continued to change. Streets that had once been safe and inviting during the day now felt unsettling even in broad daylight. People avoided walking alone, and children stopped playing outside without adult supervision. Many families installed security cameras on their properties for the first time. Meanwhile, Amelia's family struggled with overwhelming grief. They held a small vigil in Maple Park, leaving flowers and candles in the spot where her phone had been found. Weeks passed without any new leads. Forensic experts attempted to analyze the tire tracks again, comparing them to regional databases, but the results brought no closer answers. Investigators began to fear that the case might grow cold. The heartbreak of the discovery turned into frustration for both the police and the community. The possibility that someone had slipped in and out of Willowbrook, committed a horrifying crime, and disappeared without a trace began to feel all too real. Months passed with no significant developments, and the disappearance of Amelia Park gradually shifted from urgent headline to an unsettling memory that the town tried to bury deep within its collective conscience. The police continued their investigation, but every promising lead eventually died out. Some residents moved away, uncomfortable with the idea of living in a place where such a tragedy had occurred. Those who remained carried on with their lives, yet a lingering sense of unease clung to every familiar street corner. The once trusting community had been permanently changed, and the tragedy remained a shadow over daily life. Then, in early autumn, something unexpected happened. A local fisherman named Harold Peterson was walking along a riverbank just outside of town, checking his equipment and searching for a good spot to cast his line. As he stepped under the bridge, he noticed a small metal box partially buried in the mud. It looked old, rusted around the edges, and appeared as though it had been hidden intentionally. Out of curiosity, Harold cleaned the box and tried to open it. Inside, he found several items that sent chills down his spine: Amelia's favorite silver necklace, a photograph of her taken without her knowledge, and a torn page from her personal diary. Harold immediately contacted the police, and the box was sent for forensic examination. This discovery breathed new life into the investigation. Unlike the scene at the construction site, the metal box had significant evidence that suggested Amelia had been watched for an extended period of time before the murder. The torn diary page described a feeling Amelia had weeks before she disappeared. She wrote that she thought someone was watching her during her walk home, but assumed it was just her imagination. The investigators realized that the killer must have observed her daily routine for days or even weeks, carefully choosing the moment to strike. It was not a random act but a meticulously planned crime. The police decided to re-interview anyone who lived or worked near Amelia's route home. They asked questions about anything unusual, even the smallest details that might have seemed insignificant before. During these interviews, one name started to appear repeatedly in different conversations: Victor Dalton. Several people mentioned seeing him walking near Maple Park at odd hours, sometimes late at night and sometimes early in the morning. Victor was a quiet man who rarely interacted with others. He had lived in Willowbrook for years but kept to himself, working from home and making only brief appearances around town. The investigators visited Victor's house and conducted a thorough search. They found no direct evidence linking him to Amelia. His house was tidy, and there were no suspicious items in plain view. Nevertheless, something about his detached behavior and unexplained movements bothered the detectives. When questioned, Victor calmly stated that he often took long walks to clear his mind, especially at night. Without any concrete proof, the police had no choice but to let him go. However, they quietly placed him under discreet surveillance and began to monitor his activities closely. Despite this new focus, days turned into weeks with no clear breakthrough. There were no suspicious communications, no unusual travel patterns, and no sign that Victor was involved in anything illegal. Still, the police couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. As the investigation continued, a growing sense of tension gripped Willowbrook once again. Residents tried to remain hopeful, but the disturbing possibility that the killer was still living among them made every passing day feel heavier than the one before. By late winter, the investigation had reached a point where even the most dedicated officers began to fear it might never be solved. They revisited old files, reviewed evidence again and again, and retraced every step taken since Amelia's disappearance. The name Victor Dalton stayed at the forefront of their minds, but without proof there was nothing they could do. The case seemed stuck in an unbreakable cycle of dead ends. That changed unexpectedly when a team of road construction workers was dispatched to repair a damaged section of an old country highway outside of Willowbrook. While clearing debris near an abandoned farmhouse, they uncovered a hidden steel door embedded in the ground. Initially believing it might be an old storm shelter, they forced it open and immediately contacted the authorities after seeing what was inside. The underground room was unlike anything they had expected. Instead of old supplies or farming tools, the space contained a disturbing array of items that pointed directly to premeditated surveillance and planning. On one wall, there were detailed maps of Willowbrook marked with lines and symbols. Another wall displayed photographs of several women from the town, each taken without their knowledge as they went about their daily routines. Amelia's pictures were the most numerous and occupied a central space on the wall. In a locked cabinet, officers found handwritten notebooks describing the movements of the women, including the exact times they left their homes and the routes they took each day. Further examination revealed a single detached tire in the corner of the room. The tread of that tire matched perfectly with the deep tracks found near Maple Park the day Amelia disappeared. With this evidence in hand, the investigators returned to one fragile question that had haunted them for months. Who had access to this abandoned property? They quickly discovered that the farmhouse had belonged to Victor Dalton's late uncle and had never been sold or rented. Victor inherited it several years earlier and never told anyone. This revelation confirmed what many had suspected but had been unable to prove. A warrant was issued immediately, and police rushed to Victor's home in Willowbrook. To their shock, he was gone. His house looked recently abandoned, and most of his personal belongings were still inside. Only a few essential items were missing, suggesting he had left in a hurry and taken only what he needed to survive on the run. They found an old backpack missing from his closet along with basic camping supplies. The front door was unlocked, as if he had no fear of being discovered. A growing alarm spread throughout the town as the news broke that the man responsible for Amelia's death had been living among them the entire time. Panic returned as residents imagined Victor moving silently through their streets, watching from the shadows. Parents escorted their children everywhere, and no one walked anywhere alone. Police patrols increased, and checkpoints were set up on roads leading in and out of Willowbrook. Fear that Victor might target someone else kept everyone on edge, especially since it was unclear where he had gone or what he might do next. Despite their efforts, the authorities were faced with the chilling reality that Victor had vanished without leaving any obvious trail behind. Several months passed after Victor Dalton fled Willowbrook, leaving the town trapped in a state of fear and uncertainty. Though the police organized extensive searches and circulated his photograph across neighboring regions, Victor seemed to have disappeared without a trace. Residents avoided isolated areas and adjusted their routines, always wary of the possibility that he might return. The case haunted the investigators as each unsuccessful lead reminded them how dangerously close Victor had come to escaping justice forever. Just as hope of finding him alive seemed to fade completely, a hiker traveling through a remote woodland more than 100 miles away made a startling discovery. Deep in the forest, concealed behind dense undergrowth, the hiker found a makeshift shelter constructed from fallen branches and tarps. Curious, he peered inside and saw items that matched the description from the police bulletins, including an old backpack and several notebooks. The authorities were immediately alerted. When they arrived and searched the shelter, they found no sign of Victor, but what they uncovered inside sent shivers through everyone involved. The notebooks contained pages filled with disturbing details. One entry described Victor's movements on the day of Amelia's abduction, outlining how long he waited in the park and how carefully he chose the moment to strike. Another notebook described his escape from Willowbrook and his observations of different women in towns he passed through. Most unsettling was the final notebook, where Victor wrote a full confession of the murder. He described how he had spent months studying Amelia's habits and carefully choosing the best opportunity to approach her. He explained how he had separated her from the main path and taken her to his uncle's hidden underground room, where he carried out the crime. As investigators continued to read, they discovered a shocking twist. Victor wrote that Amelia had not been his original target. The notebooks revealed that he had spent months observing another woman who lived near Maple Park and had planned to abduct her instead. On the day of the crime, however, that woman did not appear at her usual time. Victor wrote that he grew impatient and frustrated, fearing his chance would be lost. When Amelia passed by alone, he decided to change his plan on impulse. He admitted that he chose her simply because she was vulnerable and alone. This lack of personal motive deeply disturbed investigators, who realized the tragedy could have happened to anyone walking through the park that day. Further searches of the woodland led officers to a nearby cave hidden behind a rocky hillside. Inside, they found Victor's remains. He had taken his own life, leaving behind no explanation beyond what was detailed in the notebooks. His final message stated that he knew the authorities were closing in and that he didn't want to spend the rest of his life in prison. With Victor's death confirmed and his full confession recorded, the case was officially closed. Amelia's family held a quiet memorial service, hoping to find some closure from the painful revelation. Yet, the nature of the crime left a lasting scar on Willowbrook. In the years that followed, the town slowly returned to a sense of normalcy. New families moved in, businesses reopened, and parks once again filled with laughter and activity. Even so, the memory of Amelia's life and the horrific randomness of her death continued to linger in the background. Residents remained cautious, forever aware that tragedy can strike without warning and turn even the safest place into a scene of unimaginable heartbreak.